Good evening all. Hope you all enjoyed the tour of the George and Dragon, and this is our introduction to the paranormal, our paranormal investigation, our introduction to Suki and the other ghosts. This is a two-parter, this one. But Suki, a beautiful 16-year-old barmaid who worked at the George and Dragon pub in the late 18th, early 19th century. Suki fell for a handsome, distinguished gentleman who was passing through the village, much to the annoyance of three local lads who had desires on the girl themselves. By way of getting back at her, they sent a message to Suki, supposedly from the gentleman, asking her to meet him at the cave at night, wearing a white dress. So off she went in her finest white dress, believing they were going to run away together and marry. She entered the caves, only to realise the message had been a hoax. The lads started laughing hysterically at Suki. The girl was furious and started throwing rocks at them. The lads retaliated by throwing rocks back at her, but one struck Suki on the head, knocking her unconscious. She was secretly brought back to her room at the inn, but the next morning she was found dead in her bed. Suki has been seen many times in the room, and also gliding along the corridor outside, mainly in the early hours of the morning. She is still seen wearing her beautiful white dress, and has also been seen making her way through the village to the caves and making her way back again. Wherever Suki is experienced, there is a strange coldness, particularly in the room that she breathed her last. Another 18th century guest was reportedly robbed and murdered at the George and Dragon, contributing to another unquiet spirit to the pub's collection of regulars. He is said to manifest himself in the signals of heavy footsteps going up and down the main staircase heard at night, and creaking floorboards when no one is awake. So, that's our intro. And we are now gonna take the same journey that Suki took. Now, I've looked online everywhere and I can't find any records to back up whether Suki was a real person or not. But various paranormal investigations have thrown up certain things, shall we say, that makes it interesting. And as we leave Suki's former home for the last time, with the moon above, if the story be a true one, we have to think of the mindset of that young lady. A barmaid, a servant, a respectable enough role. But think of what would have been going through her mind, that she was going to marry a gentleman and become a lady. What she found at the other end is bloody sad, really, and has proven something my nan said to me once, that young people and children can be far more wicked than adults can in some cases. We go under the church loft where pilgrims once slept, and we make our way down Church Lane. Past its beautiful old houses and the church loft. And we wonder if there would have been a bright moon on the night that Suki made her way to the caves. Just have to point you this way a minute. Better go up this way as there's a car coming. Whew. Before 1928, the road that takes you all the way up to the church didn't exist. So for the villagers, rich and poor, would have been a pretty arduous trek. Whew. And if I die of fright and reach the afterlife myself, I hope I'm no longer fat and out of breath when I get there. Any young people that are watching this, maybe thinking about starting smoking or vaping, just don't. And here we are. At the Hellfire Caves themselves. It's in there that Suki would have gone, been hit with a stone, and if the story is true, carried back to the Georgian Dragon and died there. But her spirit is said to wander back and forth between this place and the Georgian Dragon, and wander the Georgian Dragon. Also, inside here, in our part 2, you'll see an urn, and inside that urn was buried the heart of Paul Whitehead. The heart was stolen in 1828 by an Australian soldier. His ghost has been seen ever since, wandering around West Wycombe Park and here, and the mausoleum above, looking for his lost heart. The screams and cries of babies have been heard from inside here. Stones thrown and things like that. So yeah, this is our part 1, and I hope you're going to enjoy the next part, where we shall introduce you to the caves and a much more in-depth introduction to the ghosts themselves, or their stories in life. Our introduction to the ghosts will hopefully come on our paranormal evening. Hope you've all enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.
Welcome to the West Wycombe Caves. I'm Sir Francis Dashwood, and I'm going to tell you a very curious story. In the 1750s, there was serious unemployment in the countryside as a result of 3 successive harvest failures. So one of my predecessors, another Sir Francis Dashwood, decided to build a new main road between West Wycombe and High Wycombe.
My sole reason for making the road is the welfare of the villagers. I am determined that they shall have employment.
Chalk for the road was dug out of the caves. About 100 men were employed at a shilling a day. Several years later, the caves were said to have been used for meetings of a very strange club, the Hellfire Club. Its regular meeting place was at Medmenham Abbey on the Thames, about 8 miles away. The real name of the club was the Brotherhood of St. Francis of Wycombe, but they weren't at all saintly, although the membership did include a Chancellor of the Exchequer, the First Lord of the Admiralty, several members of Parliament and other prominent men. Ladies were also admitted. They wore masks and a badge with the words "Love and Friendship."
Well, I thought I'd give you first the history of how the caves came about. But we are on the ghost trail this time, so if you're into a more in-depth look into the entire history of the caves and the notice boards and everything, see my previous video on that. Meet the steward, who'd have paid the wages of the men digging out the caves. Our main ghost trails that we're on today are, of course, first and foremost, Suki, Paul Whitehead, Sir Francis Dashwood, and other members of the Hellfire Club. Ghosts in the caves. Paul Whitehead, 1710 to 1774. Many people have many reasons to haunt the caves, but none more so than Paul Whitehead, steward of the notorious Hellfire Club. On his death, he left £50 to Sir Francis Dashwood for the purchase of an urn to be deposited in the Dashwood Mausoleum, so his heart could be placed inside and remain with the Dashwoods forever. In 1829, an Australian soldier stole the heart, and the urn was then placed in the caves for safekeeping. Paul Whitehead's ghost is reported to haunt the caves, searching for his heart. The White Lady. Tradition holds that Suki was a servant girl in the 19th century who worked at the George and Dragon, a tavern in West Wycombe village. She rejected the advances of 3 local village boys, as she had set her sights on becoming the bride of an aristocrat. One day a wealthy young man paid a visit to the inn, and Suki, seeing him as her prospective bridegroom, set about ensnaring him. This angered the local boys, who hatched a plan to teach her a lesson. They sent her a letter purported to come from her suitor, informing her that he wished to elope with her and asked her to meet him at the caves in her wedding gown. She arrived at the caves only to find 3 spurned lads. It was then that the prank turned to tragedy. Stones were thrown, in temper, knocking her unconscious. She later died. An apparition of a lady in white is said to be seen within the caves over many centuries. She's also, as I've mentioned in part 1 of this, been seen walking from the caves back to the George. And been seen in the George herself.
Paul Whitehead was a minor poet and steward of the Hellfire Club. His job was to keep a record of the wine and drink consumed at Bedmouth Abbey by the brothers. Whitehead died in 1774, leaving this rather odd bequest.
I bequeath to Sir Francis Dashwood my heart, together with £50, to be laid out in the purchase of a marble urn, in which I desire it may be deposited and placed in some corner of his mausoleum, as a memorial of its warm attachment to the noble founder.
On August 13th, 1775, Whitehead's wishes were duly fulfilled. Sir Francis led a large procession up the hill, followed by a company of the Bucks militia, a choir, and a band with fifes, flutes, horns, and a muffled drum. The urn was carried on a litter by 6 grenadiers. The procession went 3 times round the inside of the mausoleum to the music of Saul's funeral march. The urn, which you see here, was then placed in the niche, whereupon the soldiers fired a triple salute. Accompanied by repeated salvos from the cannons on the frigate on the lake. For years afterwards, Whitehead's ghost was seen flitting about the place. It's certainly rather creepy down here, isn't it?
And that is what we'll be investigating Sunday night. Paranormal investigation up on the hill around the mausoleum. which is brightly lit at night time, so that's one comfort, isn't it? You can but wonder what they got up to down here, can't you? And the men themselves, members of the Hellfire Club. I shall read out their names. Sir Francis Dashwood, Lord Despencer. Paul Whitehead, poet and steward. Earl of Sandwich, First Lord of the Admiralty. Lord Malcolm Regis, politician. Sir Thomas Stapleton of Grays, near Henley. Sir William Stanhope, MP for Buckinghamshire. Thomas Potter, son of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Sir John Dashwood, King, MP and landowner. Dr. Thomas Thompson, physician to the Prince of Wales. Francis Duffield, owner of Medman Abbey. John Tucker, MP for Weymouth. John Norris, MP and Don of Magdalen College, Oxford. Arthur Vansittart of Schutzbrook Park, MP. Sir Henry Vansittart, Governor of the Bengal and MP for Reading. Robert Vansittart, Regius, Professor of Civil Law at Oxford. Charles Churchill, poet. Robert Lloyd, poet. George Selwyn, MP. John Wilkes, MP. Sir John Aubrey, MP. Dr. Benjamin Bates of Aylesbury. William Hogarth, painter. John Hall Stevenson. Edward Lovibond. Mr. Clark of Henley. Dr. John Moulton, MP. Richard Hopkins, MP. And Sir John Russell. And that's the members of the Hellfire Club. We shall bear those names in mind. And if any of my fellow history enthusiasts or professionals, whatever you want to call yourselves, have heard of any of those names and would like to ask them any questions, please let me know.
Well. Fancy running into Sir Francis and that great American friend of his, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin often stayed at West Wycombe and visited the caves in 1772. He wrote afterwards to a friend, Mr. Dacour, in Philadelphia.
The exquisite sense of classical design, charmingly reproduced by Sir Francis Dashwood at West Wycombe, whimsical and puzzling as it sometimes may be in its imagery, is as much evident below the earth as it is above it. I must admit, you have some exceeding odd ideas, Francis. Fancy putting the golden ball on top of the church. John Wilkes tells me that it is the best globe tavern ever.
Not at all, my dear doctor. You should see the splendid buildings in Venice with their golden domes, and there are few cities to equal St. Petersburg, which has the best golden onions I have ever seen. The Kremlin in Moscow is full of them too. I wanted the church to present a great prospect, not the gloomy old ruin it used to be. You must climb into my golden ball and see the view. On a fine day you can see as far as Camberley, where John Norris has built a similar tower with a golden ball. We've exchanged signals from our golden balls using mirrors to deflect the rays of the sun.
What a capital notion! I have heard of heliographic lighting in the tunnels of the pyramids, but not of overland signaling. You certainly have some novel ideas.
You can still climb up the tower when it is open and see the magnificent view, but the Golden Ball, which seats 6 people, has had to be closed because of damage by vandals.
Wouldn't want to meet them two on a dark night, would you? Christ, it's as cold as the ground's nostril down here. Joseph Borgins, he painted many of the frescoes in the church above and the paintings in West Wycombe, the paintings of West Wycombe House, which is West Wycombe Park. Well, the grounds thereof anyway.
Chalk blocks and rubble coins were found in 1973. The men used picks and crowbars for dislodging the chalk, which is extremely hard. An architect or mason was in charge of the work. The chalk blocks and rubble were then carted away in wheelbarrows and tipped into carts.
There's some loose chalk in the crevice above your head, Rackstraw. You better knock it out and also trim back the edges.
Right you are, Mr. Harris. I'll soon shift it with my pick.
nice job of this cave.
Aren't we going to hide some more money? You never knows. Might come in handy to my grandchildren, if they happens on it.
Not until it's all finished. Then maybe we'll hide some. At the end.
Some 18th century coins were found in 1973 in a crevice in the banqueting hall. They dated from 1714 to 1754, which suggests that chalk was being dug from the old quarry at the entrance to build new houses in the village before the caves were started. The road to Wycombe was finished in 1752, but more chalk may subsequently have been needed for the road to Oxford. If they did hide some coins, they haven't been found. Perhaps it's like the secret passage to the church. There's no sign of that either, although there is a hidden opening sealed with chalk blocks, possibly for safety reasons.
Meet Suki.
The men used picks and crowbars.
Most Haunted. The ghost hunting team from the renowned living TV programme Most Haunted carried out an overnight vigil within the caves during December 2003. Two members of the team were Yvette Fielding, and a presenter, and Derek Okora, their medium. With their highly technical ghost hunting equipment, they spent the night without lighting in the caves. They said the caves were the darkest place they had ever visited. During the night, they had many paranormal experiences, seeing light orbs and hearing noises such as babies crying and stones hitting gates. Bats flying through the tunnels also caused some scary moments. Without prior knowledge of the mysterious Hellfire Caves, Derek Okora, the medium, felt the presence of a young girl dressed in white. Could this have been Suki the Bride Ghost? And of females dressed in nuns' habits. Ladies of the night were said to have worn such attire to disguise themselves while entertaining club members in the caves. The programme was first shown in April the 20th, 2004. Since then, the caves have had many overnight vigils carried out by other paranormal investigation teams. None have left disappointed. Many visitors come to the caves to see if they too have a paranormal experience.
If they did hide some coins, they haven't been found. Perhaps it's like the secret passage to the church. There's no sign of that either. Or where there is a hidden opening, sealed with chalk blocks, possibly for safety.
We're now about to cross over the River Styx. About as near in this world as we're ever going to get to such an experience. In its original day, this bridge that is here did not exist, and the river, or little lake, whatever you want to call it, under here was much deeper. So you would have to get into the inner temple by boat, which makes you really wonder what they got up to. The inner temple. The cave is 100 metres beneath the church. This cave, and when we go to the inner temple, we can only see through the gate in a minute, but we are directly under the church. We're in hell and heaven above. No one knows what took place in it. The words of Mrs. Lib Powers. Here, according to local tradition, the Hellfire Club occasionally held its meetings. She also mentions the hook in the ceiling, which is still there for suspending a lamp or chandelier. The scene shows some of the members in the club, John Wilkes, Lord Sandwich and Charles Churchill, against a statue of famous Venus de Milo. The ladies who attended the meetings usually wore masks in order to remain anonymous, and a badge with the words love and friendship. They had to be cheerful, lively disposition to improve the general hilarity. The 12 Apostles. The Hellfire Club boasted some of the most outstanding men of the day. The club was so popular that two categories were established, the superior and the inferior. The superior members were called the 12 Apostles and were probably created from the original 12 brothers. A new abbot was elected each year. This was a privileged position. Sir Francis, as well as being the founder, was the spirit and head of the club that took the part of Christ. The brothers were all given pseudonyms to conceal their identities, Sir Francis being Francis of Wycombe, John Wilkes, John of Aylesbury, and Paul Whitehead, John the Aged. The brothers generally wore brown habits of the Franciscan order, but for the chapter meetings, the inferior wore white flowing robes and the superior crimson and blue. On these occasions, only the superior were permitted beyond the banqueting hall to perform their rites. As the port was finished at the end of their feast, the abbot rose and made a toast to the devil. They then made their way down through the triangle, which was said to represent part of the feminine anatomy, to the inner temple. We can only guess at the rituals that took place in the secrecy of this subterranean sanctum. And the baboon story, this is another interesting one. The story goes that John Wilkes took a baboon to Meddenham Abbey in 1762. The baboon had been brought back from India by Sir Henry Vansittart, the governor of Bengal, and was kept at Shotsbrook Park with the Vansittarts' home near Meddenham. Wilkes is supposed to have dressed this baboon as the devil and to have released it during a service at Meddenham Abbey. The poor frightened creature then jumped onto the back of Lord Sandwich, who shouted out, "Spare me, gracious devil, thou knowest I am only fooling. I am not half as wicked as I pretend," whereupon the baboon escaped through a window. It seems that Wilkes was probably involved in playing some sort of practical joke on Lord Sandwich, and that this helped to bring about the break-up of the club in 1763. Although it continued to meet intermittently for another 10 years or so, but the real reason for the break-up was fierce political disagreement between those who supported the appointment of Lord Bute as head of the government, with Sir Francis Dashwood as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and those like Wilkes who strongly opposed it, especially the signing of the Peace of Amiens in 1763, which brought an end to the 7 Years' War. Here is the River Styx, with its artificial stalactites and stalagmites. The inner temple.
We are now about 300 feet down beneath the church and mausoleum. This river is called the River Styx, after the legendary river which separated this world from the underworld. 200 years ago, a boat kept here crossing to the inner temple. No one knows what strange rites went on there. Most of the members of the club led busy and constructive lives. Sir Francis was an active politician for 36 years, becoming Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1762 and then Postmaster General. In 1773, with the help of Benjamin Franklin, he produced at West Wycombe a new flagel for the Church of England. Its purpose was
to prevent the old and faithful from freezing to death from long sermons in cold churches, to make the service so short as to attract the young to life, and to relieve the well-disposed from the infliction of interminable prayers.
The flagel was not a success in England, so Franklin took it to America, where it was used to draw up the Episcopalian flagel. Sir Francis's real claim to fame was for his architectural work at West Wycombe, where he went on building temples and improving the landscape right up until his death in 1781. Anyhow, this is the end of my story, and I still wish you enjoy it. It's also the end of the cave. The mind you don't get lost on the way out, or you might have to spend the night.
It's got sinking mud in there. And that is the end of the caves and our introduction to the ghosts. Join me on our paranormal evenings, and I hope you're all going to find it interesting.